Hi, I'm Patricia Georgiou. I'm the head of partnerships at Jigsaw. So let's see if this works. It works. So how can technology protect people and democracies? I'm sure you can think of many examples where technology is actually used against them. Many speakers before me have mentioned examples, but every day around the world, we hear stories about accounts being hacked, elections being disrupted by cyber attacks or misinformation, journalists being silenced or harassed, and people getting bullied on social media, or young people falling prey to radical propaganda through social media. And this makes total sense. We live in a connected world. Who in this room does not have some form of digital life? In less than 20 years, we've gone from 400 million internet users to 4 billion. And this number keeps growing. So, of course, there is a cyber spillover, where conflicts that you would see in the physical world have a digital dimension to it. You can even say that it's actually much easier to attack people online. In the physical world, if you wanted to do an attack, it would be costly and risky. There would be a risk of being identified, and therefore a risk of punishment or retaliation. Internet is a game changer because you can be anonymous, or you can hide behind fake personas, or real personas, or even bots. And you can reach millions of people with just a few free clicks. This is why Google decided to create Google Alphabet, which is the mother company of Google, created Jigsaw, which is the team that I work at. So if you think about Google Alphabet's mission, it's to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. At Jigsaw, we specifically focus on one aspect of information, which is the subset of information that's most crucial to democracy: news, human rights, the voices of journalists, the voices of activists and politicians and citizens. These voices are incredibly important to democracy. And because they're increasingly online, it means they're increasingly vulnerable to cyber attacks. At Jigsaw, every day we're trying to tackle these threats. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what we're doing with technology to try and tackle these challenges. As I was saying, press and free speech are at risk everywhere in the world, and particularly, but not only, unfortunately, in areas where there's more conflict and instability and repression of press and freedom of speech. All that information being online, we decided to tackle it through protecting that information and protecting free speech. One of the very first threats that we saw was called a DDoS attack. This is basically a digital attack where you attack a server. So let's say you have a news website or a human rights organization that has its website where you publish reports about human rights violations or a corruption scandal involving a government. This server of your website can be taken offline with just $5. For $5, you can buy a DDoS attack and completely silence a website by attacking their servers. We saw this happening all around the world, from Ukraine to Angola, even obviously in the US, in Europe, everywhere around the world. There are actually hundreds of thousands of DDoS attacks every single day. So because Google servers are also vulnerable to these types of attacks, we've invested a lot in protecting our own infrastructure through layers and layers of protection. And so we decided to bring the power of this infrastructure and make it available for free to important voices of democracy like news and human rights, election monitoring websites. This is called Project Shield. Obviously, DDoS attacks are not the only form of cyber threat. There are also people who try to steal your password. There are, for example, people who will try to steal your password by pretending that you're on your Gmail page, but it's not. It's a fake Gmail page. That's called phishing. So we created various ways where you can protect your Google accounts, your Gmail accounts from people trying to steal your passwords. There are other forms of threats to access to information, which is people being behind firewalls and not being able to access the free internet. We developed some tools that can help journalists access the free internet and basically break news or share investigations that they're doing with other journalists around the world without being surveilled either by state-sponsored actors or by other types of actors who would be trying to steal or hack their accounts and know what they're reporting. It's called Outline. And one more thing that I will mention in the realm of internet infrastructure is a tool called Intra, which we recently launched, which is basically protecting the infrastructure level of the internet. So as I was mentioning earlier, the server is a vulnerable part of the internet system, but there's also another part which is quite cryptic. It's very technical. It's called DNS. So basically, if you type google.com in your web browser, it will actually connect you to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now that kind of conversion is done by DNS servers, and sometimes those can be poisoned. So even though you type Google or BBC or NewYorkTimes.com, you might be sent to a fake page. All of these tools are very useful in general, but particularly around elections. We realized that there are a real peak of cyber attacks around elections, which is not surprising. Last year, for example, during the Dutch elections, the two main websites where voters go to have information on candidates and decide who they're going to vote with were both DDoSed. So those attacks happen increasingly around elections, and therefore we have decided to go on campaigns. We have called this Protect Your Election. We basically travel to different countries where we tell people about digital security tools, how they can protect themselves, either with our tools or other people's tools, as long as they protect themselves. One of the campaigns that I did recently was going to Kenya. I went to Kenya for a year ago for the presidential elections, and I was trying to talk to journalists and activists about digital security, but they didn't care. All they cared about was their physical security. They were afraid of violence on the street. They were all leaving Nairobi to go to country houses. And I said, why? And they said, because, on the internet, on social media, all I'm seeing is hate and vitriol and people shouting at each other. And there's so much division that I'm afraid it's going to turn into physical violence on the streets. And of course, this is not specific to Kenya. We live in a really polarized world. And increasingly, people are afraid of sharing their political opinions or their religious views online. They self-censor because they don't want to get harassed or bullied, and they just end up in filter bubbles where they just talk to people they already agree with. And therefore, we're increasingly in polarized societies. But we need to be able to share different perspectives if we want to move society forward. We need to have a healthy debate for a healthy democracy, which is why we started tackling the complicated area of comments. If you go to online commenting platforms, it's really hard to remove the toxicity. Why? Because there are millions of comments every single day. Just on YouTube, there are 300 hours of videos uploaded every minute. Think about the millions of comments uploaded on Facebook every minute. It's impossible, even if you employ the entire humanity, to moderate that. So we thought maybe technology can help. Technology is really good with scale. So we decided to use the power of machine learning and artificial intelligence to train algorithms to detect toxicity like a human being would do. And I can tell you more about the tool. It's called Perspective, but we're starting to scale that. We started with English, and we're starting to scale that in other languages, but basically trying to remove the layer of toxicity from these online conversations. The last thing I want to talk to you about is terrorism. My very first day at Jigsaw, I went to the Google office in New York. I took my new badge and a laptop, and I went to the airport to go to Iraq. and I spent 1 week in a Kurdish prison interviewing ISIS fighters, young men who had gone to the caliphate to become suicide bombers. And the reason why I did that is because with some of my colleagues, we're trying to understand the role of technology in the process of radicalization. We wanted to understand, where do they go online to look for this radical propaganda? What do they look for? What do they watch and for how long? And then who do they share it with and through which social apps? We really wanted to understand the role that technology played so that we could potentially find a way that technology could help fight radicalization and extremism propaganda. And what we realized was that these young men were not seeing all the information they needed. They were only seeing the propaganda shared by ISIS on their own social media or general social media. They were not seeing the videos filmed on the ground by brave journalists or even citizens showing the endless lines to buy very scarce food or the violence that was every day in Raqqa or Mosul. They were just lacking that information. So we realized that that was an access to information problem, and it was a matching problem where you're looking for one content and you're actually missing another content. So we basically realized we're sitting on the solution, which is Google ad tools, where you basically target people with specific keywords and you match them with specific videos. Obviously, we're not experts, so we partnered with a lot of CVE in that field. So these are just a few examples. Obviously, they are all very difficult challenges. We're not saying that technology can solve them. Technology is only a part of the solution, and like in the opening statement of Dr. Jung, it's a very interdisciplinary approach. If we want to solve any of these challenges, we have to work together. This is why actually my team is called Jigsaw. It's because we really think that we're just one piece of the puzzle and we have to work together, including with the perspectives that are in the room today. Thank you.